English from University of Colorado, MA Poetics and Media Study at the University of Buffalo. She is the author of 5 books, including most recently her re-envision of T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets, Everywhere and Here in Brooklyn, published by Belladonna. Other books include I, Afterlife, Essay in Morning Time, an experimental elegy designed by poet Jeff Clark and published by Essay Press in 2007. Shadow Evidence Intelligence, a book of conceptual confrontation. Okay, should I skip over that part? Okay. Published by the Factory School in 2008. I'll skip over. She is the editor of A Helen Adam Reader, National Poetry Foundation, and she is just too modest. Recent poetic documents that blend conceptual and collaborative forms have appeared in the anthology I'll Drown My Book, Conceptual Writing by Women, which I am also in. I'm very proud to be in there with you. She is a member of the Belladonna Collective. She works as a hypnotherapist in Manhattan, and her self-help book, You Resourceful, Return to Who You Want to Be, features creative healing strategies. She has taught...
I'm the only avant-garde poet to ever write a self-help book, so this is a...
Hopefully there will be more in the future. She has taught poetry and poetics at NYU, Eugene Lang, Pratt, Bard, Naropa's online MFA program, and the Institute for Writing Studies at St. John. She has received grants from the New York State Council on the Arts, the Mellon Foundation, NIFA, and the Penn Translation Fund. Kristin Prevallet. Hit it.
Really?
Yes. You want me to say something more?
Okay, well, so this is a class on
Poetry and healing.
poetry and healing.
Talking about the mind, forms of poetry.
Right.
Putting issues in a frame or a form and then being a witness to that outside of oneself.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so with several people in here, because they took my Chance Poetics workshop, so this might be a little bit of a refresher, but the way that I think is very useful to introduce, the way that I think about connection between poetry and healing is to begin talking about metaphor. So to begin talking about metaphor, I think it's useful to conjure up now something in your life that you would like to get over, or that you would like to put behind you, right? Or that you would like to re-envision, to see more clearly. So if you can just all think about something in your life that you feel could benefit from that sort of looking at it. So, and just write one line. This is totally private.
Could it be an event or a person? Or
I would say that this would be an emotional state. So, right, because you know, if you're trying to get over something, you're in an emotional state that perhaps you're thinking about someone who you would like to get over. Perhaps it's a conversation that you would like to, someone in your life who, you know, has a particular effect on you, or, but even if it's something that you'd like to put behind you, because you're still conjuring it up emotionally in your daily life and it doesn't feel productive to you anymore. So you're ready now to put it behind you. So just one sentence of that. Just basically to call up your intentions around that thing. And the writing of it isn't as important as what's going to happen next, which is that I just want you to go ahead and just and close your eyes. And I would like you to imagine yourself getting over this thing as if it is a metaphor, meaning that you could imagine whatever it is that you need to get over like a wall. You could imagine whatever it is that you need to get over to be like a chasm of some kind, of a crevasse or a canyon. I don't know how extensive it is, this bridge that you need to create between where you are now and what you need to get over. But I do know that if you can imagine it metaphorically, that you are going to be sending a message to your unconscious mind that you're serious about conjuring it up. Because the unconscious mind, which is contributing to your feeling of wanting to get over something, communicates through metaphor. So as you imagine yourself climbing that wall, or bridging that canyon, or moving from one place to another place effortlessly, just take a moment to do that now. And just notice what happens to the original problem as you imagine yourself moving through it. Just take 30 seconds. And what you want to pay the most attention to is what's happening in your body now when you think about this issue. So the work that we do with metaphors as poets is really central in a way to something else, which I hope by the end of what I have to say, you'll have a little bit of a deeper understanding of. Because it's something that becomes very profound in the connection to healing. And that's because of the connection between thoughts, metaphors, and biochemical states in your body. So often when a person imagines something that they need to get over, and then they imagine that thing that they need to get over as a wall, that they can imagine a ladder where there hadn't been a ladder before. And they can imagine climbing up the ladder and over the wall. Or maybe they imagine a big cartoon world with a big gigantic cartoon Popeye type sledgehammer that comes and shatters the wall so that they can just literally walk through into a brand new pasture or a brand new field where suddenly the original problem, whatever that was, feels differently in the body. Because when we manifest problems in our life, it's usually between here and here, the anxiety hot zone, right? It's either like, oh, I have this clenching feeling in my throat, right? It's choking me, I can't speak. Or there's a knot right here. Do you know what I'm talking about? This feeling, this is like very human, between here and here, to feel a kind of anxiety that moves from the throat down to the stomach. Some people feel it a lot lower. I have butterflies in my stomach, right? I feel like my stomach is churning with sour milk, right? All of those metaphors of biochemical states in the body are themselves the clues in how to feel better. So if you imagine that you have butterflies in your stomach, what needs to happen to those butterflies in order for you to feel better? They need to fly in formation, right? And as you imagine the butterflies flying in formation, as you're imagining the butterflies flying in formation, and then you check back in with your stomach, you just notice that there's a little bit more space around what had been painful. So this connection between, first of all, the unconscious mind and metaphor is really important because, number one, all thoughts are unconscious. Meaning that whatever thought it is that you're having below the level of speaking is happening unconsciously often in your body. So the body and the unconscious are one and the same. Because as you take a little bit of a deeper breath now and send that breath to any part of your body that now is feeling any kind of discomfort or tension, and you just imagine that area of your body being surrounded by a little bit more space, and you can begin to just feel a little bit better in that area of your body, you know that unconsciously you've just basically regulated your heartbeat. Did you do that by saying, regulate your heartbeat now, right? No. You did that unconsciously by affecting your thoughts. So whatever, say if you had been having a thought about something that had made you anxious, that made you clamp up between here and here, and then instead of clamping up between here and here, you decided that that thought wasn't productive to you in this moment, and you went like this with your shoulders, breathed out for the count of 6, in for the count of 3, and thought about the butterflies flying in formation, and noticed that this area that had been feeling anxious suddenly felt a little bit better. You know that something happened unconsciously, because all thoughts are embodied. Because the body is the unconscious mind. There is no separation between the thoughts that you have and what's happening in your body. You know this, right? When you're feeling a little down and you're going like this, this is what your body does when you're feeling down. When you do this, in order to counter that, you get a surge of serotonin. You feel a little better. It's not a miracle drug necessarily, but you feel a little better, right? You can blush when you see someone looking at you in a certain way, right? Or you can look at nasty pictures on the internet and amazing things will happen, right? Unconsciously. So the connection between thoughts and the connection between thoughts and the body is really important. So all thoughts are unconscious. The unconscious is embodied. Metaphor is the key to communicating the unconscious. So these 3 things go hand in hand. Why? Because we as humans cannot communicate an abstract thought without the use of metaphor. We have to communicate abstraction, meaning any unconscious thought needs to be communicated at the level of metaphor. Right? This simply means that when you feel, I can say, ouch, that hurts, but if you really wanted to know what I was feeling, I would have to say, it feels like a lobster. You know, like it feels like pinchers. Or what does that pain feel like? It feels like someone's taken a knife and jabbed me in the heart. Well, is that a pulsing pain or is that a dull pain? These are the conversations we have with our doctors, right? I mean, seriously? Right? This is metaphor. The better you are at metaphors, the more effectively you can communicate what's happening in your body. Because the only way to communicate what's happening beyond language, beyond verbal, is through metaphor. But even you have to pay attention to the syntax of language, noticing that I cannot speak without using prepositions. Prepositions are metaphors. Because a preposition is anything that a squirrel can do to a log, right? So a squirrel can go through the log, above the log, under the log. So when I say there's something that I need to get over, I'm using a preposition in order to illustrate the metaphor, what's happening in my thought, which is that I'm feeling really shitty about this situation, and I need to get over it. But I can't say that in any other way except for through the use of metaphor and imagery, right? So the language is so filled with metaphor and imagery, naturally. So there's the classic language poetry assignment, which is write a poem without the use of metaphor. Now that's very interesting, because what happens is that when you write a poem without the use of metaphor, you are between categories, right? Try listening to a poem read with no metaphors, with no attempt to latch onto to communicate with you, right? There's no attempt to bring you into my world through the use of metaphor, right? Through carrying you. So when we are communicating to each other, we're always using metaphors of travel, of the journey, right? And so when you write a poem with no metaphor whatsoever, you're putting people between categories, because metaphors are all about categories. We have to use metaphor to categorize our experience, right? So this is getting in a little bit into linguistics and all that. I don't know how far we want to get into this. This is all partially coming from George Lakoff, who said, all thought is unconscious, right? This is Lakoff speaking in his book about metaphor, basically. So all thought is unconscious. The unconscious mind is unbodied. Metaphors are the only way to explain complexities of abstract thought. So what does this mean as poets? To me, this isn't about the poem. This isn't about the poems that you create, except that it's useful to know whether or not you're going to be communicating with your reader and how you're going to use metaphors to draw the reader into your world, right? So this is an interesting thing to think about. The absence of metaphor will exclude them. The presence of metaphor will bring them into your world in a way that perhaps is too easy or too cliche. The problem with metaphor is because the interesting thing about metaphors is that when I say I have the pain in my chest is like a knife sticking through it, you know exactly what I mean because it's such a huge cliche that you've heard a million times. So there's a kind of usefulness to that. But when we write too much into that zone, the poem isn't really very interesting, right? So there's that conversation that we can have about the poem, but there's really also the conversation, which is the one that I hope that you'll leave here with, which is the understanding that as poets, you have an incredible capacity within yourself to heal both yourself and other people through the use of how you speak and the language that you use, particularly the use of metaphor. So why is it that when a person is in deep pain, that the only thing the thing that works better than most of the pain medications that are out there is telling them a story, right? So Milton Erickson, the sort of father of hypnosis, or hypnotherapy, medical doctor who became the sort of uber father of hypnosis. There's a famous case story of him in the 50s going to see a man named Joe, a farmer named Joe, who had cancer in his mouth. He had to have basically half of his face removed. The man was in serious pain, and he was pissed about it. He was extremely mad about all the pain that he was in because he was a farmer. He didn't understand why the medical establishment couldn't come up with some pain remedy when he knew all about plants and flowers and stuff, and he was very thorough in his understanding of plants and flowers. Why couldn't the medical establishment come up with some remedy for the intense pain that he had? He was really pissed off about it. So the interesting thing about being really pissed off about anything is that think about the metaphor of being pissed off, of being hot under the collar, red with rage, right? The metaphors, all of the metaphors of anger are biochemical states of your heart rate elevating and you becoming literally red in the face, hot under the collar, right? So the metaphors are, begin in the body because all thought is unconscious, and in order to communicate unconscious thought, you have to use metaphor. So all of the metaphors for anger are often having to do with the elevation of the heart rate. So what do you need to do when you're pissed off, hot under the collar, on fire? What do you need to do to remedy the situation, to no longer be angry? The opposite of that. You need to cool off, right? And when you imagine cooling off, literally even imagining cool water coming from the top of your head, trickling all down through your body, you will feel literally a different biochemical state happen because your heart rate will literally lower in that moment, right? So what happens to a person who's in an intense amount of pain, who's really, really, really pissed off, right? They're elevating their heart rate, shooting floods of cortisol and adrenaline throughout their entire body, right? Which is not helping the issue of the pain, because the only thing that's going to help that pain are endorphins. Because this is how soldiers can get shot at and continue fighting, right? It's because of endorphins. They just continue fighting. So how does that happen for a soldier but not for a guy? It doesn't make any sense. Why would, contextually, except for the issue of context, right? One guy's sitting in a hospital and he's extremely pissed off. Another guy's in the battlefield, he's also extremely pissed off, but he's purposeful. He has a direction. He's there for a reason. He's going to be a hero, whatever.
He's also distracted from the
And
pain.
he's distracted from the pain. Exactly. So distraction from the pain. Now let's talk about metaphor. Milton Erickson goes to begin talking with Joe, who's very pissed off and really only wants this pain to go away. And Milton Erickson says, Joe, I know you know all about tomatoes. And I just really want to talk a little bit about tomatoes because it's this interesting thing that happens when you plant a tomato seed. And the tomato seed goes down into the ground, and the first thing that happens to that seed are these little hairs grow around the seed that are so comforting and so relaxing. And isn't it amazing to think about how those little hairs, and they're so protective of the tiny little seed as you're feeling more comfortable now. And as you're feeling more comfortable now, isn't it interesting to think about the connection between these little tomato seed growing in this soil and how you can feel more comfortable now, right? So this is, in hypnosis, what we call indirect suggestion. Indirect suggestion comes through metaphor, through story. When you begin telling a story, and then throughout the story, you're able to weave in the suggestions that the person needs to be able to feel better. So after about half an hour of Milton Erickson going on and on and on about tomatoes, Joe, for the first time, was silent, was quiet. And the minute that Milton Erickson stopped talking, Joe wrote on a note, because he couldn't speak, keep talking, right? Then he was able to, interestingly enough, internalize that story and internalize other stories probably. I mean, you can see pictures of people getting major surgery done under hypnosis in Europe, which they are now using in place of anesthesia in most major hospitals in France and Belgium, because the healthcare system is so fucked up and so expensive. People are electing for hypnosis instead of anesthesia because it actually is better for you. You recover more quicker if you're able to neutralize the pain yourself, right? So if you see recordings of people getting, going under the knife, quite literally under hypnosis, one woman I saw basically she put herself in her room as a child, in a little piano room, much like this one, and just started singing. The doctor's, sawing away, taking this out, da 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 da. She's not feeling a thing. She doesn't feel a thing because she's somewhere else. Or if she does feel a thing, she feels it as a kind of sensation, as just a kind of. And here's the key to this. The connection here that's so important for you to take away is the connection between pain and fear. And the fact that fear exasperates pain, and that it's really a lot easier than you think to neutralize fear by switching up your metaphors. And that you can do this yourself as a practice. You can split, because you're poets, you can play around with switching up your metaphors. If you're in a slump, what's the opposite of slump? And as you imagine yourself coming up out of the slump, much like the sea monster from that movie about sea monsters, rising up out of the depths of the thick black tar ocean slump that you're in, up out of there and then into walking. Now there's the monster walking in a field of daffodils. Silly, I know. Except that all thought is unconscious. And that the unconscious is located in the body, and the only way for the body to express itself is through metaphor, in terms of language and in terms of thought. So when you start switching up the metaphors of your thought, you are affecting biochemical states in your body. And as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty cool news for poets, which is why I got out of academia and became a hypnotist. Because I'm good at it, because I get metaphor, because I can communicate to people through imagery and through the power of language, through just and not even the power of language, it's more just the ramblingness of language if you listen to me talk. I mean just da 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 da, right? That cadence that we hear in poetry is just about riding the frequency of language. And when you're doing that intentionally to help someone heal, or when you're doing that intentionally to help yourself heal, you can think that poetry actually has kind of a cool application to real life. And maybe even will help solve really major shit, like the healthcare crisis and the consciousness slump that we're in this country, right? Because the medications sure as hell aren't doing it. They're not. Right? I mean, the medications are failing across the board in terms of many antidepressants. They're just not working. The research is showing, after many years of people being on antidepressants, they're just not working anymore. They work for a short time, but they do not work for 9, 10, 11, 12 years. People become psychotic if they're on those medications for too long. Then they have to be given antipsychotic medications. People who are in pain, going and trying to take benzos to get to sleep, makes it worse after 9 or 10 months, right? Which isn't to say that I'm totally opposed to medications. If I'm in serious pain, I'll take a Vicodin like anybody else in order to get rid of it. I'm not under that kind of illusion. If I have a bacterial infection in my tooth, I'm not going to, spend hours and hours in, dealing with, that's ridiculous. Take the Vicodin. But we have to become so much more knowledgeable about this connection between our thoughts and our biochemical states. And as poets, we're the ones on the front line of this. This is what we do. So let's do it for ourselves and just see what happens, right? So that's my little transpoetics. Thank you. No, I'm just kidding.
Do you want to do an automatic writing with them, and then I'm going to do a different kind of a writing?
Automatic writing, okay.
Is that okay?
Well, first of all, any questions? Or any thoughts about that? Questions or concerns?
So all thoughts are unconscious. So therefore our thoughts are entirely embodied, right?
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. That's, in fact, what you just said is, that's Lakoff's direct quote. Yeah, exactly. And because thoughts are embodied, you effect thoughts in the body by changing the thoughts. And because we communicate...
How come it goes that way, not the other way?
Well, it goes both ways, for sure. Definitely goes both ways. You could have a feeling in your body, and that could create a whole series of triggers in your thoughts, for sure. No, it goes both ways. That's the point. It's like, the unconscious thought, it's all embodied. So there's no separation. There's no one thing happening over here and one thing happening over here. It's all happening simultaneously.
Thoughts are a strange thing.
They are very strange.
Because I know that from Buddhism, we learn that we have a monkey mind and it never stops. We, in a way, are not the producer of some of these thoughts, because how many times have you had a little piece of music in your head that you can't get rid of. And you're just like, oh, it's driving me crazy. I heard the song today and now it's in my head. You don't want it there, but yet it's there. And, you know, through mindfulness and meditation, we sort of learn that you look at the thought and you don't react to it.
Mm-hmm.
You just say, okay, you know, I'll think about you later, and you escort it to the waiting room. You know, and the next thought that comes in,
Nice metaphor.
yeah, of course. So, and then the next thought comes, you go, can you just sit in the waiting room, you know? And then the next thought comes, and you're like, you know, the waiting room is very big. It's an eternal waiting room. There's room for all the thoughts in there. So you just keep saying, please go to the waiting room, or, you know, I'll be right with you.
Mm-hmm.
And once you learn to do that, you learn that the thoughts are just strange little things.
Yeah.
That, I mean, thinking is different than these random thoughts. I mean, you can sit down and you say, okay, I gotta figure this out. So you do a thing, and you write your shopping list, and you're gonna make a cake, and so this is what you need, and so you think about it. But then when you're walking to the store to buy the ingredients for the cake, all these thoughts start coming up. You know, and then all of a sudden you'll walk past a house and there's a light coming from the house and it's going to remind you of something from your past. It's like it's just going like this
Unconsciously,
all the time, all the time. So it is important, I think, to recognize that not all thoughts are valid.
Right. You don't have to believe everything you think.
Yes, right, right. But you don't get, sorry, go ahead, Alexis. Go ahead.
I liking this. I was thinking also the question that, so are you suggesting, what are you suggesting?
What are you suggesting?
What are you hearing?
What are you suggesting exactly? Are you suggesting that we go on, if we're in a semester writing about pain and, you know, these kinds of things, are you suggesting that we start playing with metaphors and seeing what happens? And what would that do?
I'm suggesting that
What
you're
does that-
already doing it.
Right, we're in the practice of it.
Yeah, you're already.
Chris Davis'
writing.
book, Black Sun, that's a metaphor. We were both reading that book. The Black
Yeah,
Sun is
it's
a
a beautiful
metaphor.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay, so then are we supposed to turn the black sun into a cheery pink sun? And then we will get over,
No.
like, to get over the...
No, you can work with the Black Sun.
You're not saying that, right?
Well, look,
Well, so can
here's
you
what I'm
talk
saying.
a little bit about
I'm
that more?
saying that we're humans. That sucky things happen.
Yeah,
People who we love will die. We will be inevitably disappointed given what we set up for ourselves and then the reality of certain situations. Finances will probably inevitably be, you know, a real drag for the majority of us given the fact that we're all in
A real
poetry
drag is
workshop.
also a metaphor.
And a real drag is also a metaphor. So it's not the question of the fact of life being primarily about suffering, nor is it about saying, oh, suffering needs to just be forgotten about. I'm not suggesting, oh, everybody needs to walk around with a smile on their face. The question becomes, when you're having thoughts that are not conducive to that moment that you want to be thinking them. For example, if you're grieving, you need to be grieving. That's what a person does who's just lost someone. If you're walking by a light and a room and you hear a piano and that piano reminds you of someone and you take that person in and you begin crying, well, that's what you need to be doing at that moment. You know intuitively that you're okay in doing that, right? If you need to get really pissed off at someone because someone has just attacked you and you need to attack them back, you know? This is simply a way of living life in a way that's not, I mean, it is a little bit different than saying that the black sun or the slippery slope down to the cesspool of negativity, that's the fact of life, so therefore that's where we all need to live. That I can't do. Just that's my composition. Other people maybe are able to do that and live that life down in the cesspool. This is my metaphor for that. And maybe they can get a lot of interesting writing coming out of that. That, therefore, is a productive state for them, right? It's not a value judgment. It's not saying, well, that's not good and this is good. All that this is saying, if you're walking down the street headed to a poetry reading and you really had been looking forward to going to that poetry reading, and then you see someone who reminds you of this guy who you knew in high school who broke your heart, and suddenly you feel really pissed off and angry, instead of walking into the poetry reading pissed off and angry, how about you say, you know what? I don't need that thought. That thought can go in the waiting room.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a matter of living life in a way that you become much more in tune with the moments that you want to be living. And you're living those moments in the way that you want to be living them. And if it's productive to sink into a depression in order to get some material, or in order to experience something, in order to grieve, in order to be angry, and that's what you need to do, then you do that. But if you need to then get out of that depression and begin doing something else, then you do that. And you become well understood that you can do that. You have a lot more power than you think you do to be able to move in and out of those states. So it's not saying, oh, we need to ignore the negative, we need to pretend like it doesn't exist, right? It's not that. It's just, life is a series of moments. And that's a cliche, I know, but you know what?
It's true. You have a choice in every moment. You have a choice whether...
Well, maybe not in every moment. I mean,
Well,
I'm not sure about that. But, certainly in the moments after you've been thrown off track, you're down in the dumps, once again, listen to the metaphors, and you've been down there long enough, and you're like, I don't want to be down here anymore. You begin that slow plodding climb up. You are in a metaphoric journey, literally, that is changing the biochemical state of your body. And that's interesting, even just as a challenge or an experiment. It makes daily life much more interesting, because you're not at the mercy of these thoughts that you think are yours, because these thoughts are not yours. The majority of thoughts in your head come from voices. Talk about hypnosis. See, I call myself a de-hypnotist. I am not the hypnotist. Y'all are already hypnotized by all those voices in your head telling you suck, you'll never do this, your mama, your daddy, your brother batting you over the head with his toys, and you being like, oh man, I said that. That's hypnosis, right? Walking out, looking at the street signs of all the beautiful people, oh, I'm not a beautiful person. That's the hypnosis, right? Those are the voices in your head. Those are the majority of your thoughts, are other people's voices. Right? So when you begin to realize, oh, there's another voice that I can pay attention to, and it's the voice that talks to me between here and here, between the throat and the stomach. When I really pay attention to that voice, what's happening in my body, that's something else. Because when you're thinking about that voice, that other chatter isn't viable. It's not useful. It's just a thought. And it's not even yours. It's somebody else's. If you begin to track your thoughts, you'll really see what I mean. That when you really start thinking, you're like, wait a minute, who's that? That sounds like, it's interesting.
It's always your mother or your father or your ex-husband
Anybody
or
who's
your
powerful in your life.
wife.
Anybody who you set up. Right? Because so much of our childhood we spend doing this. So power is always above. Right? Control is always up, Lakoff says. Right? So when you're trying to climb the corporate ladder, because you're trying to get up there to where it's powerful. But actually, you know what? That's not where it's powerful. Where it's powerful is right here, in this moment, right? Of you interacting. So when you begin to switch up this stuff, it just becomes an interesting way of being a poet, emotionally, in the world. I guess that would be my kind of intention.
I know that there were years, I've gotten over it now, but there were years when I was in my 20s when I could not write. Because I heard voices of people saying, you can't write, you don't, it's not going to be any good. And then I remember clearly this one day, I asked myself, who are these people that are saying this? Like, you're not
Brilliant.
good. And I could not put a face on any of these people, and I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. So I and I knew about this thing about moving it to the waiting room because I knew Alan, and Alan was always about learning how to meditate, you know. So, you know, and so I said, well, I'm going to try this. And so I moved it. His metaphor was you acknowledge the thought, but you don't invite it in for tea.
Exactly.
But I like the waiting room better
The waiting
because
room's very
it's
good.
like just because then you have the power. You're like, just I'll be with you in a second, like
Right.
the doctor says, you know. And so you can take that thought. I mean, I just could not. I didn't know who was saying these things.
Right.
I could not put a face on it. So I was like, where is this coming from? Saying I can't write, you don't know how to write, why are you trying this? And I just said, well, what is that? So I said, okay, I'm not going to invite you in for tea. And so what I started doing was I would get up really early in the morning before I got really logical and rational when I was still half asleep, and that's when I would write. And after like
Undermine the strategy.
yeah, and after a couple of years of that, I had no problem with those voices anymore. And I don't have that problem with the voices anymore.
Because you stop paying attention to them.
Yeah, well, because I couldn't figure out who it was. It wasn't anybody. It was something
Right.
from me. It was like my mother telling me you don't look good in that dress.
Or a
something.
teacher.
Yeah, or a teacher. Yeah.
Seriously, teachers are the
Teachers are bad.
hypnotists of all. Yeah.
I'm going to tell you guys a story that I only told my psychiatrist. I had a
Run it,
scholarship. I had a scholarship for painting to go to the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. I had a scholarship, and they sent out a thing to everybody who was accepted, saying there's going to be a careers in art portfolio day. So bring all your stuff down, and they had teachers from all over the country, different art schools all over the country. I don't know, wherever. So there I was with my little portfolio. I was like working away on the south side of Chicago, like making drawings and stuff. So I brought it up to this woman. I was like, please, sir, can I have some more? Like Oliver Twist. And she looked at it, and she looked me straight in the eye, and she said, this isn't very good, is it? And I went like the knife in the heart. I never told anybody about this except you guys and my psychiatrist on Wednesday, because I really felt like I had to own this for once. And because she said this, I let my scholarship go, and I went to Columbia College for poetry. So maybe it put me on a better path, I don't know. But I should have looked at that bitch and said, fuck you. But the thing is, I now as a teacher, have I ever looked at anybody here and said, this isn't very good? I would never do that.
No.
Even if you handed into me the shittiest poem in the world, I don't even know what that would be, I would find something good about it. And I would say, this is a strong point, you can move this around, you can do this. It's not productive to look at someone's work and say, this isn't very good, is it? Because she looked at one thing, she could have looked at it and said, oh, here's where your strength lies. Maybe instead of going for painting, you should go for sketching or something. You need to do some life studies or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think that teachers really, really can do tons of damage.
Oh, teachers and doctors.
Well, authority figures.
Yeah,
The
sure.
authority
You're taught to
figure.
respect people
Yeah.
of authority, and they're right and you're wrong. Who are you to question
Authority is
them?
up.
But the
Yeah.
thing is, just because the person, I used to say this to my new school classes. First day of class, I would come in the room, and I would sit at the head of the table, and I would say hi, and they'd say hi, and I said, do you know who I am? And they would say no, and I said, well, you think I'm the teacher, right? I really would say that. I said, well, what if I'm not? What if I'm some idiot that's another student? And they would laugh. But it's true, because someone sits at the head of the table. Anybody could come in here and sit at the head of the table. Some homeless person could just come in and say, okay, we get out your pens, we're gonna write us Sestina. I mean, whoever sits at the head of the table, that's the thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who was this woman? I don't know her name.
You don't even know her name, and then she's in your head.
Yeah.
For a long time.
For years.
For years.
Yeah.
Exactly. So imagine the person who goes to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Oh, I've got great news for you. You do have cancer, but you have a 20% chance of surviving."
Mm-hmm.
That's a really different message than the message that they normally give,
Right.
which is the opposite.
Which is your
Stage
goner.
4, terminal cancer, you got 3 months.
Yeah.
Because what happens between those two messages any messages that we receive from authority, we begin filtering the world with that message. So once you get that message, that diagnosis, that you're no good at art,
Yeah.
you instantly will go through the world seeing yourself no longer good at art. It's very powerful. And
But
a
I
person
really
who,
am good at art. That's the thing.
Of course
I
you are.
draw really well. Anyway.
exactly. So
That's
this is
the
why
weird
this
thing,
is the
though.
thing about this is why the whole thing about metaphors, about imagery, about putting ideas in people's heads is not to be taken lightly. So when you're a writer and you're standing in front of people and you're reading to them, it becomes an interesting moment that to sort of think about. Because you can actually change. You've probably been to readings where you have felt your biochemical state change because of either the reading really sucked or was really powerful to you, or maybe just one poem. You might have just heard one poem and been like,
Yep.
I know people make fun of the people who are like, oh.
But they're doing
But
something.
think about it.
They're
Think
holding
about
their
what that
breath and then they
means.
release.
That means that those words, for whatever reason, and maybe you think that that reason is totally doggerel and cliche, but that person felt something happen in their body through language that came into their cellular being and released it in the form of a breath. That's pretty damn cool, right? So we have this capacity. We do this to each other on a daily basis, for better or for worse. And so, right, the thing about authority is be careful. If you hold someone in some kind of high esteem, if there are people in your life right now who you're like this to, the voices, anything that they say, you will hear magnified. This is just how we are, right? Just because of the act of being a child. Those voices will be magnified. Are those the voices that you want to really be hearing? Are those people really the power in your life? Or is there somewhere else that you can go to find that? And then right from that place, hearing those voices.
And once you make those voices sit down and behave themselves, and other voices can come up.
Right.
Yeah. And you can have access to voices other than your own. You can be accessing character voices, you can hear other things, you can bring it in,
Right.
It's really, once you let that voice go, then other things happen. I really think that's true.
Yeah. So there was a woman who came in. Oh, did you have a question?
Ari, you was going to say
Oh,
something?
I do have a question, but
Go
it's
ahead.
not
It
exactly
is.
about.
Go ahead.
It's not on this line of thought, but an anecdote also. I read something by Eileen Miles recently where she was saying that before she sits down to write, she imagines that everyone is eagerly awaiting what she has to say,
Yes.
and is going to love it and is going to love
Yep.
her.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Which, when you told your story, just reminded me
Yeah,
of
it's the
that.
same
That is
thing.
amazing.
Because there's this like, who's gonna want this, why am I doing this? There's like this self-defeating kind of thing,
And that particular article was about gender and writing, and
Where'd you see it?
I can't remember, it was a while ago.
Okay.
But it was about, publication disparity and how that's still real.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about that Vita survey, Women in the Arts, where they were talking about the percentage of women that get published and the percentage of men.
Yeah, I think it was a response to that.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, right.
Um,
Well, you know what I was saying to Kristin before class, too, I saw another statistic, and this is interesting. Women so it's a situation where an editor rejects your work but says, this isn't right for us, send again, send something else. 5% of women will send again, whereas 25 to 30% of men will send again. Women will think, he's rejected me, he or she's rejected me, I can't send.
Right.
But men will think, well, I'll send again, So that's an interesting statistic,
I'd be interested to see how many of them will send again and actually get published.
Yeah, right. That's the third statistic.
That would be some interesting data to accumulate, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But that kind of-
Anybody else?
Juliet.
Well, that kind of suggests that we're like biologically screwed in a way as women.
Unless we know it.
or unless that's,
culture.
acculturated
Yeah.
Response,
behavior.
yeah.
But you can know it. I mean, once someone tells you, look at this, then you can always file it back there and say, oh, That's like a mindfulness, that's like a